And so you understand better why there are so many Bible versions out there. And the answer is actually fairly simple. Some people just don't understand it. So we'll talk about that. But remember, mark it down for September, more targeted men's and ladies studies for 6 weeks. All right, and then we have some other stuff we'll get into. Well, let's have another word of prayer here, and we're going to jump back in the book of Galatians. Father, we thank you today for the privilege that we have of being able to be here in this church. We thank you for East Lake Baptist Church and for all the folks who work so hard to make things happen and who give and who volunteer. We appreciate all of them. We ask today as we study here more in the book of Galatians that you will teach us what we need to know, that you will give conviction where it's needed. If there's someone that's on the outside of all this looking in and just trying to understand what Christianity is all about, that you would make it more clear to them today. And for us as we listen to teaching that's all around us, so we will have wisdom to know how to judge whether it's right or wrong. Help us not to fall prey to false teaching. Give us what we need today, please, and bless those working with our children in our nurseries today. In Jesus' name, amen. Galatians chapter 3 we're going to today. We've had a few interruptions to Galatians because we had some really cool stuff going on. We had Youth Sunday and the wonderful CJ preaching last week, and then Caleb had a couple times this summer too. We're back here into Galatians now, so I'm going to start with this. Have you ever done something really dumb? Most of you have done something really dumb. Oh, stop pointing at your spouse. No. Yeah, you've done something really dumb. We've all done something really dumb. You've backed into your mailbox. Any of you backed in your mailbox? Any of you forget to open the garage door and back up and hit your garage door? I actually did that a few years ago. I didn't get it bad. I just forgot to open for some reason, backed into it a little bit. Maybe you put gas in the hydraulic tank. How many of you done that? I've done it twice. Once to a rescue vehicle, once to a ditch digger when I was landscape in college. Yeah, you do dumb things. You think you learn, right? You left your groceries at the store. How many of you walked off and left your groceries there? Okay, yeah. And some of you are thinking, don't get on mine. Don't get on mine because I've done. How many of you done something really dumb this morning? Okay, we got a few honest people. We do dumb things. When I think about that, I think about the famous philosopher who had this famous line. Did I do that? Dr. Stevie Urkel, right? You said that sometime. Come on, did I really do that? Come on, I knew better. Why did I do that? Well, in a sense, that's what Paul is going to tell the Galatians today. He's going to be like, why did you do that? Why did you not engage your brain? Okay, this is a good way to look at life. We should engage our brain. God gave us a brain to use. We're supposed to think sometime, not just open it and allow anything in there that we might want there. We disengage our brains. We do dumb things. And sometimes we need someone to steer us in the right direction and say, no, that was stupid. Okay? But maybe not in that way. Why did you do that? Especially when it's something that's really serious. And that's what Paul is doing. He's coming to the Galatians and he's saying, you guys, no, this was the theme of his whole book. You guys were saved by faith. You put your trust in Jesus, and that's why you're saved, okay? You got your sins forgiven because you put your faith in Jesus. You realize that you cannot get to God through any way. Not the actual law, the law that God gave to Israel, that won't get you to God. And being really good people, that won't get you to God. There's nothing that will get you to God other than trust in what Jesus did for you on the cross. It's that faith. That's what unlocks the salvation for you. That is what saves you. And the Galatians were like, that's cool, that's wonderful. And they became true Christians by faith. But then these other people who we call the Judaizers, who were still trapped in Judaism, the religion of Judaism, they came in and they were saying, no, Galatians, that faith is all really cool. Trust in Jesus, that's all really great. But you also need to do something to be a real God follower. You need to be circumcised and whatever else. And Paul's like, think about this. Don't do something. They were falling prey. They were falling for this. And he's like, you guys are foolish. You're dumb. You're not thinking. If you were saved by faith, why do you think you need to keep it by your own efforts? The Galatians apparently hadn't thought through this. They were just listening to these teachers that came in and just believing it. And so here's the main point, the thing that we need to understand today. Don't just believe everything you hear. My mom used to say that, right? Don't believe anything you hear. You know the rest of it? And only half of what you see. I think I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago, right? Don't believe anything you hear and only half what you see. And of course, in today's society, you can't believe much of what you see either. That's when I showed you the picture of Mike, wasn't it? A few weeks, remember that? And don't believe anything you hear, only half of what you see. But And that's what Paul is saying to them. Come on, Galatians, don't just believe what people tell you. These people come in and they're eloquent and they sound good. And you're like, I just want to believe what they teach. No, you stop and think about it. And this is so applicable for us in today's society because we are inundated with people who have things that we should believe. Podcasts, videos, television, devotional books, commentary books. All kinds of things, believe this. And we're like, oh, this person's really smart, so maybe I should believe that. No, stop and think about it. Does it make sense? Does it square with the Bible? Did you study the Bible out for yourself? So this is so important, not just to believe everything. So Paul comes along and tells the Galatians, stop believing this stuff. It's not true. With that in mind, let's read Galatians chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. He says, oh, foolish Galatians. Can you imagine me starting a sermon like that? Oh, foolish Eastlake people. Who has bewitched you? He'd be like, I'm not coming back next week. That guy's mean. He's supposed to be nice. I come to church to feel fluttery and nice inside, and he's telling me that we're foolish. Well, Paul did the same thing. Oh, Jesus did it too. You whitewashed sepulchers, So, but I try to be a little nicer. I guess I'm not Christ-like enough, whatever. But he says, oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified? You guys are fools. Why are you not believing the truth? This only I want to hear from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? How did you get saved? By the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are you now being made perfect by the flesh? Have you suffered so many things in vain, if indeed it was in vain? Therefore, he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you, does he do it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? How did you come to God in the first place? From your works and your actions or by faith? Well, the answer is we came by faith. Why are you trying to keep it by the law? It doesn't make any sense. Stop and listen to what these people are telling you and don't just buy into it. Stop and think about it. He says you are foolish. He said you are bewitched. Who has bewitched you? You say, what does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. You do a little word study on that word bewitched, and it describes people who use wicked arts to lead people to believe something. It's like if I came in here, I want to tell you something that was new to you, you weren't believing it, and I said, this is why you can believe it, and I make some magical thing happen. Like I poof a rabbit out of a hat or something, or I do something, you're like, wow, man, that guy's got power. He can really do stuff. I'm going to believe what he says. And Paul's like, who did that to you? Well, what did these people do? What magic trick did they show you? How did they put some spell on you to make you to believe that garbage they're teaching? And here's your problem, Galatians. You weren't thinking. It's in my devotional book, so it must be true. And my devotional book is popular and is famous. It's written by someone who everybody knows, so it must be true. No. You use your brain and you compare to what you already know in the Bible. Every time something doesn't sound right, it's new to us, we should compare it with what the Bible says. And we should do that with a lot of things that we've heard our whole lives too. Paul says you have been bewitched. Someone has put this spell on you. They fooled you and you just believe everything that they say. These were the Judaizers. The people were telling them, go back to Judaism, go back to the law if you really want to truly be saved. And Paul was like, no, don't do that. Stay away from that. They didn't even have YouTube back in, believe it or not, they didn't have YouTube back in Paul's day. You remember, how many of you remember life before YouTube? I remember it. How many of you got the big old manuals to fix your car? Every time you buy a car, guys, you go right down to AutoZone or somewhere, and you get the Chilton's or whatever manual. Now it's all on YouTube. I mean, you can rebuild an engine off YouTube after 5 minutes, maybe not quite that much. But, it's fun. But they didn't have YouTube where they could get these things like we do, and podcasts, like I said, and books and all kinds of things. There is so much information being crammed at us that's not true, but it can sound really good. And Paul says, don't be bewitched. Don't let them put this spell on you. Don't let them have some great, eloquent message, and you're like, wow, it must be true. Basically, this is what he says in one word. He says, think. That doesn't mean that your logic and your knowledge can get you to truth. It means if you don't use your logic and knowledge, you can easily be led astray. There's a difference there. Think about what these people are saying. Think about what you believe. Think about everything that you should know and everything that you believe. there are reasons why we believe the things that we believe. Christianity is not a blind faith. Have you heard that term before? It's a blind faith. You know, a faith is believing something that you have no reason to believe. That is like the worst definition for faith. That's not what faith, biblical faith is. What's the definition of faith I like to say? It's trust in something that has been proven reliable. That's what it is. It's trust. And we trust in what God has said. And we look around us with apologetics. We look around us and there's reasons to believe the things that we believe. And Paul says, can you not think about this a little more? Think about the things that you believe. Think about these people that are coming and teaching you this other doctrine, and don't believe them if it doesn't jive with what you already know. Cast it out. Set it aside. It's wrong. And specifically, this is what Paul is saying. If you became saved by your trust in Jesus, are you going to keep your salvation by your own works? And the answer is, that's ridiculous. Okay? Of course you can't do it. You didn't get saved by your own works. You can't stay saved by your own works. That's his point. So really we have kind of two parallel themes through this passage. One is that you can only get saved by your faith. You can only get to God by faith. He did all the work, and you unlock that for yourself by faith, by trust in Jesus. And the other part is, if you're already saved, you need to watch out for what people are telling you and evaluate everything that comes into your mind. Everything that you read, everything that you hear in a class, in church, in your books, on television, and everything, just evaluate it. Is this true or is it not? We should not be gullible people. We should be thinking people. God doesn't ask us to turn off our brains and just believe everything. He gives us brains to use and evaluate so we know the truth, because that's what we want to know. So what Paul does is he rebukes the Galatians here, and in doing so, he gives them some ways to know if something is true or not, how to evaluate the things that you hear. And because false teaching did not end in Paul's day, we still have it today. Well, I think we need to take some of these things and say, how can I evaluate the things that I hear? So basically, I'm going to give you two things here today, two things that we can apply into our lives when we hear teaching, and we want to know if it's true. So you have your outline there, or you can download it from the website if you want it digitally. Blindly following a teacher leads to error. Blindly following a teacher leads to error. So this person has a big following. Just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. Just because they're pastoring a big church or wrote a lot of books or have a lot of degrees, because they really sound good, doesn't mean that it's true. We're supposed to think. We're supposed to compare. Remember, we go back to this all the time. What did Paul say about the people in Berea? You remember that? You guys should be like them, like the people in Berea. Because I, Paul, minister of the gospel, apostle of Jesus Christ, told them something, and they didn't believe it till they checked it out. Paul, I haven't heard that before. I know you're an apostle and everything. I know you're getting the stuff from God, but I'm going to check with the scriptures to make sure you're right. And he condoned them for that. He said, that's a good thing. You should never believe anything I say without checking it out. If it's something you haven't heard, like that's a new thing. Oh, I believe it. The preacher says so. No, you better check it out for yourself. Because I'm going to do my dead level best to tell you the truth about everything. But if you don't get in that habit, you're just going to believe what somebody else says. That's not right. They will try to dupe you. Why do you think you have all these people following all these ridiculous religions and things out there? Well, somehow they bought into it. We need to engage our brain. We need to think. Paul says, someone has bewitched you. Someone has put this spell on you. So two things under this to remember. First of all, and this is just very simple. Never determine truth by the authority, eloquence, or charm of the speaker. Think about what it says there. Never determine truth by the authority, eloquence, or charm of the speaker. What does that mean? If someone gives up and they give a great presentation and they sound like they're really smart, we just, this is a smart person. They must know what they're talking about. Not necessarily. You ever know two really, really smart people, credentialed in their own field, who disagreed? If not, get into theology, right? Get into science. Get really smart people, and they disagree on things. I love to watch debates over theological things. And really, really smart people, or even atheist and Christian debates. And they're really, really smart people, and they don't agree. So I got to check it out, right? Footnotes. Where do you get that? Don't just tell me that. Where do you get that? Don't just give me a fact. Tell me how you know that that's a fact. That's what we ought to be like instead of just believing everything. So someone have great authority means they have the degrees and whatever, and doesn't mean they're right. Someone with great eloquence. Man, if you are eloquent, you can get people to believe almost everything. Because you know when to raise your voice. You know when to lower your voice. You know how to pull at the heartstrings. You know when to dim the lights and brighten the lights. You know all this, and you're very, very good. And people are like, if it's that good of a presentation, it must be truth. Not necessarily. Truth is truth, regardless of how eloquent the speaker is. And what about the charm? You say, I have not seen a charm speaker since CJ was preaching last week, right? But the charm, sometimes you're like, oh, I just want to believe this person. No, always check it out. Always check it out. Never determine truth by the authority, eloquence, or charm of the speaker. They might be giving the truth, and they might not be giving the truth. We just need to learn to always be thinking and rational and logical and comparing everything back to the Bible. Is that actually what the Bible says? Second thing under that to remember, never determine truth by how widely it is accepted. Think about that one for a minute. Well, it must be true because everybody accepts it. Okay, has there ever been anything that society at large has accepted that we found out was not true? How many of you have bought a house that was built before 1978 at some point? No, it's getting pretty old now, and anything built before 78 is old, me included. What do they tell you? What do they do? They give you this paperwork. They say, oh, we have this lead-based, whatever they call it, and if you sell it, that's hard because, you have to sign off that you don't know anything about the lead-based. And so if you have an opportunity to learn about lead-based paints in your house, don't even go there because you don't want to know about it. Because then you have to tell them when you sell the house. Then it's a whole big health thing. Why do we have to worry about lead-based paint in houses? Because at one time, the smart people thought it was a good idea to put lead in the paint. Now they found out, oh, guess what? That'll kill you. Now you can't have lead in the paint. So what happened? What happened to all the smart people who thought it was a good idea? They weren't right. They were wrong. We've seen smart people get things wrong. Have any of you ever seen this guy before? Anybody know him personally? 1915, Albert Einstein wrote a paper that had equations for his theory of general relativity. And his equations indicated that the universe was expanding. Big problem. The thought was that the universe was static. It's always been there. It's not changing. It's not growing, not getting smaller. It's static. This caused a problem for Einstein because he believed what everybody believed. He says, you know what? One of the smartest guys ever lived in this world. He says, you know what? My calculations show that the universe is expanding. But I don't believe that it is because nobody believes it is. So he added within his equations what he calls the cosmological context, or I wrote it down. Now I can't say it. Constant, the cosmological constant, that's how we know it, or the universal constant. He added it in there to make the equations make it look like the universe was static. They call it Einstein's fudge factor. And later he came to regret it. He said it was, in effect, he said that was one of the dumbest things I ever did. But what he did, a smart guy bought into what everyone was saying. He says, my equations show that this should happen, but because I believe differently, I have to change my study to prove what I already think. I guarantee you that's not the only time that's happened in this world. Einstein's so smart, guess what? He purposely did something wrong. And guess what they found out? Oh, yeah, by the way, Einstein was right. The universe is expanding. Now, what's the problem with that, by the way? So what if it's expanding? What does it matter? We're all expanding, right? What's the matter if the universe is expanding? If the universe is expanding, you go backwards in time, it shrinks down to having a beginning. Wait a minute, now you're dangling on that precipice of maybe something brought it into being. Maybe there's a God. Now they come with all kinds of stupid ideas. It was nothing, then all of a sudden it was there, and then it just, from nothing, it came into, just dumb, right? But when you start saying the universe expanding, go back in time, it expands down to nothing. How did it get from nothing to something? That's the big question. That's the question that creationists have, and that's the question that evolutionists have. You get from nothing to something. How do you get there? Well, if there's an eternal God, that's not that hard to do, right? If there's no eternal God, how are you going to work that out? So that's really the big question. But see, Einstein and everybody else is like, no, there can't be a God, so this is what we're going to believe. It means not thinking. The smartest guy in the world didn't engage his brain. Don't believe someone just because they're smart. What about this one here? I don't have a picture, but some of you remember the 1970s. You remember this guy named Jim Jones? Jim Jones, the Kool-Aid man, right? Built a church called the People's Temple. They left for Guyana in South America because people were saying, this guy seems to be a fraud. So he went to down Guyana and started his big whatever. I don't want to say ministry. I wouldn't call it a ministry. And eventually, Congressman Leo Ryan went down to visit Jonestown and said, wait a minute here, something's not right here. So they killed him and his entourage. And then Jim Jones, what did he do? He got all his people together, put out the grape punch, laced it with cyanide, and they all killed themselves. What would cause somebody to do something like that? Why would they follow such a deranged person? Because I've never heard him speak as far as I remember, but he probably was charming in some ways, eloquent in some ways. He obviously had something about him, some charisma where people would follow him, and they never stopped to think, this isn't real. Okay, so his healing escapades or his healing things, they weren't real. There's a lot of stuff like that going on in the world today, too. It's a cliche. You ever heard it? These people have the healing things on TV. Why don't they go into hospitals and heal everybody? That's a cliche, but it's a good question. I mean, if we could hold the service here and y'all come up and give me some money to heal you, it sure would be nice to go down to St. Mary's or St. Anthony's or whatever, if that's even still named it. Go somewhere and okay, we're going to clean this place out. I know all the medical professionals around here would hate me. They'd be out of a job, but some of you would love me, right? Well, why not? A lot of it is fraud. But people are like, oh, it's cool, man. They got the best music and all this cool stuff, and we're just buying in. And they just buy into it. And Paul tells the Galatians, cut it out. Think. Work through what you're believing. Listen to who you're talking to, or listen to who's talking to you, and evaluate them. He's not saying question authority about everything. That's kind of a term today. Question all authority. No, he's saying when you hear something, you question and find out, is that true or not, before I decide I'm going to believe it. So be so careful about what you believe. Look at what Paul even said. If you want to go back a page or so to Galatians chapter 1, verse 8. He says, but even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than that we have preached to you, let him be accursed. Now repeats it again in the next verse. Paul says, if I come along and I preach something to you different than what you already know, let me be accursed. He's like, I don't care who it is. You evaluate everything with the truth. In that day, the only thing they had to evaluate with was the Old Testament scriptures. We have as far as the Old Testament. So Paul came in preaching, and he's saying, I'm preaching to you Jesus. You look in the Old Testament, you can find him there. Maybe not specifically by name, not by the name Jesus, but you'll find out about the coming Messiah. You find all these prophecies. In fact, that's the one thing that switched Paul from being a non-believer to a believer. He saw that Jesus was risen. Wow, everything made sense. And Paul says, you guys need to evaluate. You guys need to think about this. So first, blindly following a teacher leads to error. Okay, don't just follow someone just because they say something. Next one is lack of thinking leads to error. You probably picked up on that one already. Lack of thinking leads to error. These people were gullible. The Judaizers came in, and what they said sounded so good. And they had some Bible verses for it. I mean, they could pull out the Old Testament scriptures and talk about how God says you're supposed to obey the law. And they're like, wow, who are we to say anything against the scriptures? But they didn't get the whole thing. They didn't get the whole thing. You can pull Bible verses out and make it say anything you want it to say. Man, you can find a Bible verse for anything. I made a little video here last year on my birthday or Father's or something. Lori gave me a mug that I had made. I had seen it somewhere, and she had someone make one for me. And it says, I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. I should have brought it, but I didn't think about that. I can do all things, because is it Philippians 4:13? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can make a touchdown through Christ who strengthens me. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about going through trials and tribulation, but I can do it because Christ is there with me, right? But I can take any kind of verse and make it say anything I want to say. And you should be like, that doesn't sound right. I'm going to go and I'm going to look at the context around it, the context of the whole book and the whole Bible to see if you're telling me the truth. Don't just believe someone because they can quote a Bible verse or half a Bible verse at you. Study it out, find out what it actually says. I can't stress that enough. Lack of thinking leads to error. And verse 1 of Galatians 3 here, he basically tells them, I have clearly taught you the truth. Who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth? Before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified. We clearly describe the crucified Jesus to you. It was clear. No question about it. We made it clear for you. How come it's not so clear? Jesus died to take the punishment for you. Why do you think you have to do something now? We were clear about this. What's wrong with you people that you're not believing the truth anymore? And then in verse 2, this only I want to learn from you. I just love his kind of his sarcastic attitude through this. This only, I just want to learn one. Tell me one thing, okay? Just tell me one thing. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? How'd you get saved? Did you get saved by doing something or did you get saved by faith? How was that? The answer, of course, is just by faith. So why do you think you have to keep it by doing the law? And the people were like, that's a good question. You should have thought of that before, right? Think. Paul is telling these people to think. When you don't think, you will be led into error. We have this big thing in society today. It's called deconstruction of faith. Have you heard of it? We hear about it all the time. People who have big names, musicians or maybe even some preachers or whatever, and they decide to deconstruct their faith. What that means is they dismantle everything they believe because they don't have reasons to believe it anymore. They don't think, I don't believe this, I don't believe that, and pretty soon they're left with, I don't really believe anything. Why do they do that? This is why if you read their stories, almost every single time, their story is they grew up in a conservative church, like a conservative Baptist church. Generally, that's what it is. And they heard a lot of the things that you get that aren't Bible, but they're like pounded on you, right? Things that aren't Bible, but it's like it was the only way you could be. They hear all that. And then they get out in the world and they start seeing people living in the LGBT lifestyle and they say, wait a minute. I'm tired of being hounded with unbiblical, and I'm not talking about that. I'm, should women wear pants or not? That's the kind of stuff they're being pushed on. But they get out there and there's suddenly in this free world and they're like meeting people that are living in the LGBT lifestyle and they're saying, you know what? I like these people. And I don't like how I grew up. That was too strict. I didn't like that. But I like these people. They're so kind and loving. And I think that, these two men, they're married and boy, they love each other. So who am I to say that that's not good? Because that looks good to me and I like that. I'm going to go back to the Bible and say, wait a minute, it does not agree with that. So I'm going to dismantle this because I like that. That's called deconstructing your faith. That's what starts it. Almost every time it's the LGBT lifestyle. I like that. The Bible doesn't agree. I'm going to dismantle everything I believe. I'll take a few good things from the Bible that are feel good, but I can't believe it anymore because I think that's a good lifestyle. That's usually what it is. Paul would come and say, how stupid can you be? You do not determine truth based on what you like, what you agree with. But this looks good. It looks fun. So therefore, that must be true. I'm going to take this and destroy it. No, when you look for something that's true, what are you trying to find out? You're trying to find out what's true. And if I, through apologetics and through study and whatever else we can do, determine the Bible's true, if something doesn't agree with the Bible, that has to go. You see what's going on? But our society's like, no, we want to be acceptable to our society. We want everybody to like us. We want everybody to think we're great and we're woke and all this kind of stuff. So we'll set aside the Bible and we'll go with that. No, you say, what does the Bible say? And you just give it straight. And if somebody doesn't like it, that's their problem. It's not yours. You don't change the truth based on what somebody thinks. And that what Paul's situation here was the gospel. And we might have that too, but we have so many other things in our churches we have to deal with now. You just go back to the Bible. That is the standard of truth. And if it's outside of that, then it's wrong. Paul is like, think about this. Truth doesn't change based upon what you want. Truth is truth, whether you like it or know it or agree with it or not. It makes no difference. Truth is truth, and that's what you want to find out. So Paul says, you guys are foolish here. You guys are so foolish because you did not think through this. By the way, that word foolish, he says, oh, foolish Galatians. The Greek word there was written in Greek, obviously, originally. The Greek word there means unintelligent or not exercising the mind. That's what it means to be foolish. You're not exercising your mind. It's like the question I started at the beginning. Have you ever done anything dumb? When you did something dumb, you just failed to exercise your mind for some reason. You didn't think. You forgot to open a garage door. You forgot to ask somebody something or whatever. You forgot to check your bags when you left the grocery store, whatever it was. You just, for whatever, you forgot to think. And that's what Paul's saying. You foolish Galatians, you forgot to think. When someone came in and they taught you this thing, you didn't think. So there's your definition. Foolish means not exercising the mind. God gave you a mind. Use it. He gave you a mind. Use it. By the way, Jesus used the same term. After he had risen from the dead and he was walking along, remember the road to Emmaus? He's walking along and these two guys show up and he's talking to them and he's like, well, you guys so sad. And they said, well, man, where have you been? Have you heard anything? We follow this guy Jesus and he died, and we're all sad. And they're talking to Jesus and they don't even know it. And what did Jesus say? Let me read this. It's Luke chapter 24, verse 25. Jesus said, oh, foolish ones and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ who has suffered these things and entered into his glory? He says, foolish ones. What he's telling them is, you have the prophets who are telling you about the Messiah. Stop being so glum that this person you think is the Messiah died. That's what he was supposed to do. How foolish can you be? You didn't read your whole scriptures. You're following this guy, and you didn't study everything. You didn't know. If you would have studied, you would have seen. You would have read, of all things, Isaiah 53, where the Messiah is going to die, and he's going to be elevated and raised. How foolish that you didn't engage your brain and read the Bible, the scriptures, and think about it. I wonder how many times Paul would show up in our church today and say, you guys are foolish because you're believing some of this stuff. You're believing stuff that society throws at you. You're believing doctrinal things that are not right. Error creeps into the church when we naively believe everything that we hear. We should not naively believe. That doesn't mean everything. You sit there with a slant in your eyes, look at the preacher taking notes, like, I'm going to get him on this one, That's not what I'm talking about. Most of the stuff I say, if you've been in church for a long time, you're like, oh, I heard that, I know that. But if there's something else, you'd be like, I never heard that before. You take it home and you study it. Why did he say that? You don't just believe it. That's foolish. A smart person engages their mind. They go home and they study and say, I never saw that before. Okay, so there's a new thing to believe. But if you say, no, that's not what it says, you don't believe it, regardless of who told it to you. So Paul's question, did you receive the Spirit by the works of law or by the hearing of faith? How did you get saved? By faith or by law? The answer, by faith. Okay? He's already established in this book, and he'll establish it many more times. You can't get saved by your works, by your efforts. It's impossible. It's only by faith. His next question, are you now being made perfect by your flesh? When he talks about your flesh, he's talking about the things that you do, because your body is what you do things with. Are you now staying saved through the actions of your flesh? And the answer is no. So he says, think about this for a minute, guys. Just think about this. Just clear your mind of all this gobbledygook that these people have come and preached to you. You were saved by faith. How do you stay saved? Now, that's not a good way to word it, because it's not. If you stay saved because your faith, God keeps you saved, right? But what these people were saying is, I got saved by faith, but now I have to do some things to stay in. So I was like, no, you couldn't get in by your works, so you can't stay in by your works, okay? It just doesn't work that way. Think about it. Think about it. Use your mind. So my question, really kind of two questions. First one is, how prepared are we to face errors that we hear? How prepared are we? In doctrine, what we believe is obviously most important, but when you watch TV, you watch the news. News, it's just like a bad term anymore. News isn't news anymore. It's opinion. I'm going to watch the opinion tonight, turn the channel, whatever, and I'm going to watch the opinion. Because a lot of times that's all it is, someone's opinion. You got to pilfer through all that and find out actually what the truth is. But, when you watch that, do you think that person might not be telling me the truth? Because they have a nice camera and a nice TV station doesn't mean they're telling the truth. So, but in doctrine, it's so important, the things that we believe. Are you ready to face it? What if someone were to come to you today and teach you something that was not true? Would you be able to have your little antenna go up and say, whoa, that's not right? Or would you be like, this person's written books, this person's got degrees, this person is so eloquent, they must be right? Not necessarily. Everything that we hear that's new, we should have our antenna go up and say, you know what, I'm going to check this out. We need to be thinking people so we don't fall into error. That's obviously the main point today, but we also need to look at the other point that Paul was talking about is, wait, how did you get saved in the first place? You know, there could possibly be someone that's in here today or that's watching us online, and you're saying, you know what, I'm going to get to heaven because I'm like really good. I'm not like those people that are out the golf course this morning. They're sinful because they're not in church. I'm in church. That ought to get me somewhere, right? God's going to accept that. I gave money to the building fund. Probably more than somebody else, so you know what? It's pretty good. You know, am I going to get to God? Am I going to get to heaven? Look at all the stuff I've done. Man, you know, surely I'm in. It doesn't matter. That's what Paul is saying. There's nothing you can do to get to God. Absolutely nothing that you can do to get to God. The only thing, when it's not really a do, it's a response. I'll accept what he's giving me by faith, by trust. That is all that it is. And Paul says when someone starts coming and telling you you have to do something to get your salvation, your forgiveness of God, that person is a false teacher. So we'll wrap it up with this. Here's a fatal error, thinking we can become righteous through our own efforts. Righteous means in a state where God can look at me and accept me. I can do something to reach that. That's a fatal error. You can't. You never become truly saved if you think you can do something to earn it. It's simple faith in what Jesus did. He earned it for you. So 2 things. If you're not a believer here today, and this is kind of new, or maybe you never really accepted it, why don't you make this today? You say, okay, I'm just going to trust in Jesus. Nothing to me. I'm just going to trust in him. If you don't believe me about that, read the Bible. That's what I'm telling you. You say, this is all new. Well, read it. Find out what it says for yourself. Don't just believe me. But some of you that are Christians, you might just sometimes be buying into something. You know, the latest book that comes down the line, the latest famous preacher or teacher. You're like, oh, I'm just going to swallow all this stuff up. Stop and think about it. It might be good. It might be bad. We should evaluate everything so we don't fall into error. Bow your heads with me and close your eyes, if you will. We're going to have our invitation time here in just a minute. Maybe you need to take a few minutes with God. You can stay right there in your seat and just talk to him. You can come here to the front if you want to, a little time to be alone and just talk to God. If you have a question for me, you need some help maybe with your salvation or something, come in and talk to me. I'm glad to help you or get somebody to talk to you about it. Father, we thank you today for the things that we can learn here from your word, for Paul just laying it right on the line, just telling them, not holding back, saying you're foolish because you're not believing the truth. Help us to be people who believe the truth. And if there's someone who needs to put their faith in you today, you're working on them about that, ask that they will respond today. In Jesus' name.